Just let me know when it starts.
Yo! Welcome to my Summer Lair. I am your host, Sammy, lost in the shared universe Younan. Paul Vermeersch returns with a distinct poetry collection, Shared Universe, New and Selected Poems, 1995 to 2020. This is more than just a best of collection, although it is that. You remember how Marvel movies started with Iron Man, then the Hulk followed that, Thor, and then Captain America? Each character and their whole world was properly and firmly established. Like a patient architect, Marvel Studios introduced each remarkable character via solo movie before bringing them all together. Avengers Assemble. And to Paul Vermeersch, that's like writing poetry because it follows the same process. A writer issues poems in various books and publications, and it's like an Iron Man standalone movie or a Captain America movie. With Shared Universe, as he explains it, he's now bringing his poems together, all of his poems together, Avengers Assemble, and the result is a fascinating contrast in light of a bold yet fresh context. As you'll hear him say in this conversation, he says, I understand that I work in an art form that has less broad popular appeal than, say, a superhero film. But I can certainly borrow from that genre what I think is interesting and use it as a framework for the work that I am doing. Yes, that's so dope, isn't it? And as you can understand from this introduction, I'm a sci-fi nerd and so is Paul. So that's obviously the ideal place to start a nerd poetry conversation. Paul recently tweeted out he saw Tenet. When the movies were open, I eagerly went to see it. So let's get into that inverted time movie, because that's sort of what Paul does with Shared Universe. The poems in this best of collection are not chronological. Instead, many of them are fueled by an optimistic imagination, a space-age hope for the future. Sometimes we gotta look back to look ahead. You recently tweeted out that you watched Tenet. I want to know how you found the movie.
I think I need to watch it again.
Yeah,
Uh,
I felt the same way.
I'm not sure that I got the whole experience of it. Obviously I did not watch it in a movie theater. I watched it at home, and of course at home there's a myriad distractions.
Yeah.
You know, my cats are asking for attention, and you can sort of pause the movie and get up and go to the bathroom if you need to, and you could get a snack, and you can look at your phone, which is something you can't do in a movie theater, right?
Yeah.
So all these things, and this, I mean, I know Christopher Nolan has been sort of grousing about the fact that his movie didn't have the opportunity to have like the full theater experience, but I mean, this is the time we live in, and so I think a second watch might be necessary in order for me to sort of piece together the whole thing, because it's really a puzzle, and in order to put all the puzzle pieces together, you have to really understand how the inverted time mechanism works, and I'm not sure that I got my head around that watching it the first time.
Yeah, I found the physics for this movie a little bit too complex. Like Inception was kind of straightforward. It was kind of weird, obviously, but the physics kind of made sense. You're like, all right, I get it, and then they go do their thing. This one with inverted time, I found it a little bit too much. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm really not sure that I understood sort of how it works, or like what the parameters for using that inverted time device were, and so I think after one watch, which, and admittedly kind of maybe I wasn't giving it my full attention, but I think if I am to understand everything that happened in the movie, or even most of it, I'll need to watch it again.
Partly the reason I'm asking you about Tenet was A, because I was curious what you thought. B, you're a sci-fi nerd, and also during an interview for your previous poetry book, Self-Defense for the Brave and Happy, you said in an interview, "I have to wonder if our appetite for cautionary tales, rather than aspirational ones, is a symptom of widespread societal regression or one of its causes. I'm haunted by the question, if we spend more time imagining a better world, would we eventually achieve one?" That was a couple of years ago. So where are you at now, like, with that philosophy?
I don't think I've changed my mind much on that score. I think clearly we tend to put our energy and resources and effort into things that we think are achievable. No one in their right mind spends time and effort on things that they think are impossible. And I think if we imagine progress and equality and equity and a better world for everyone, it will begin to seem more achievable. And as a consequence of that seeming, more effort, energy, and resources will be spent in trying to achieve it.
You're talking about like Kennedy's "we're going to go to the moon because it is hard, not because it is easy" type of speech,
I
right?
I think that's an example of the kind of optimistic futurism that I sort of have a nostalgia for. I think in the 1960s, futurism was very optimistic. I think in the space age, forward-thinking people looking towards the future, were imagining a better world for the most part.
Star Trek.
Star Trek, sure. Walt Disney's Tomorrowland. Uh, uh, Thinkers and architects like Buckminster Fuller.
Mm-hmm.
All of these people, futurists in their own right, Gene Roddenberry, Walt Disney, Buckminster Fuller, John F. Kennedy, all futurists of one type or another, imagining a better world and putting resources, effort, and imagination into achieving that better world, or at least showing us what it might look like. And somewhere as the space age dwindled away, when we stopped going to the moon, when the space age became rather than a exercise in human achievement and human imagination, a more sort of dollars and cents economic enterprise, our imagining of the future changed. And these hopeful futures that we imagined during the space age became dystopias, became post-apocalyptic, apocalyptic scenarios. We started imagining what the world would be like when civilization collapses or becomes so bloated and decadent and selfish that it can't sustain itself. We start to imagine the world that gives us the sort of hyper corporate evil society that we see in the Alien movies or in Blade Runner,
Yeah.
or we start to see we start to imagine the collapse of our civilization instead of the full realization of its potential. So that futurism of the space age, which was very optimistic, that sort of Tomorrowland, Star Trek, Buckminster Fuller vision of the future, gave way to this sort of more pessimistic, sort of disastrous vision of the future. And I think the more time we spend imagining the collapse of our civilization, the more inevitable it becomes. And I think the more time we spend imagining the full potential of our civilization, the more possible it becomes. And so in this way, I think that the imagination and storytelling and art and envisioning is actually a very important and practical enterprise to engage in. And I think if we imagine a better future, it's more likely we can achieve it. And I think if we imagine a terrible future, I think it's also more likely that we'll achieve that. And I think that there are those powerful people who think that it will be easier to profit from a terrible future, and
Mm-hmm.
so they exercise what power, effort, and resources they can into ensuring it, so that they might profit from it.
Yeah, it's better to operate in darkness in the light for like a weird kind of paradox. Like, you know what I mean? Like, be evil up front rather than be evil up in the shadows. It's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah. Uh, so I think art and culture and storytelling are powerful, not only powerful tools, but powerful engines of societal transformation. And I think if people see the possibilities of a better future, not only will they be more inclined to work towards it, but they'll be more inclined to demand it.
What about the value of a cautionary tale, though? Is there any value for those?
Certainly there are values in cautionary tales, but I think they need to be framed as such. I think they need to be framed as sort of a cautionary lesson rather than an inevitability. And I think there was a tipping point where these cautionary tales started to be presented or understood as inevitabilities rather than things to be avoided. And it's at that tipping point where I think, things begin to fall apart, and people lose hope in that better tomorrow. And so I think in order to swing the pendulum back the other way, it's sort of incumbent on artists and writers and sort of culture makers to push that pendulum a little bit by presenting that better world, by imagining it so that we can achieve it, and putting it back in the consciousness of society.
Does that pendulum swing back and like you just use like better world? Hope is a powerful word. Like you can't just casually drop hope into a conversation. It's like a grenade. So, as you as a poet, you as a writer, does that pendulum swing back? Does that also include taking back certain words or kind of reframing certain words?
Like, I mean, obviously, I'm a writer, I'm a poet. I think words are powerful, and I think words carry meaning. I think uh, I think people who can't afford permanent housing. I think people who can't afford an education without going into lifelong debt.
Mm-hmm.
I think people who cannot count on any kind of job security are less likely to have hope for the future, which is why the powers that be have, over the last 50 years, exercised so much effort into reducing job security, making education less affordable, making housing less affordable. It's literally to winnow away people's hope for the future, to make them more compliant, to make the workforce less likely to rise up. You can't rise up if you're afraid you're not going to eat tomorrow. You can't rise up if you're afraid you're going to be out on the street without a roof over your head. And so if education comes with the cost of sort of being saddled with lifelong debt, the debt trap, if housing is precarious, if work and sort of a livelihood is precarious, then the sort of the rich, powerful people have a greater control over the working class, and there's less hope. hand in hand, the rise of sort of pessimism, dystopia, post-apocalyptic imaginings has come along with this sort of reduced job security, reduced housing security, reduced food security, less access to higher education. So if we can imagine a society where housing is affordable and secure, where a livelihood is affordable and secure, and education is accessible without falling into the lifelong debt trap, then we can foresee and achieve a sort of a more equitable, a more prosperous future for everyone in society, which is why I think we're starting to see a push towards things like universal basic income.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a floor of prosperity that we will not let the majority of people fall below, then we can push off from that floor and begin to climb up. And the resistance to providing that stability is mainly coming from those who profit from instability. And the more artists and storytellers and culture makers can show people what a better future society might look like, then the more people will demand it, and the more effort and energy and resources will be marshaled into trying to achieve it. Or at least this is what I believe.
It's the classic analogy of like you're hungry for something and you open the fridge and you look at it, all the stuff that you have, but you don't know what it is that you're hungry for. And so you're talking about developing an appetite for hope.
Absolutely. That analogy works just fine. You know,
Mm-hmm. So
that analogy works just fine.
there's a whole section in your latest book, Shared Universe, and we'll get more into Shared Universe, but there's one section I want to focus on right now, which is More Poems of Prophecy and Clairvoyance. That's the name of the section. More Poems
Sure.
of Prophecy and Clairvoyance. So, with what you're saying just now, do you find it easier to look ahead with hope towards the future, even if current circumstances don't suggest that we'll be okay?
I think over the past several years, it's been very difficult to look forward to the future with hope.
Mm-hmm.
So, uh, so that's what I mean when I say I'm nostalgic for the futurism of hope. I'm nostalgic for that space age optimism, and I would like us as a culture to get back to that kind of hopeful, optimistic, forward-looking kind of attitude as a people. And I don't think that by and large we have it right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think sort of the Trump administration and sort of the creeping crypto fascism, which isn't so cryptic anymore, is all designed to annihilate hope. It's all designed to make people feel powerless. It's all designed to make people feel that there is no truth, that there's no surface against which they can push to sort of right the ship. And I think people who profit off, like I've said, people who profit off of chaos and people who profit off of hopelessness like it that way. And I think there's a lot of people who amass a good amount of money and power by keeping things that way. And we need to use our sort of our political democracy in order to achieve some kind of economic democracy. And from that, we can begin to argue for a better future, a more equitable future, a more sustainable future, a more secure future for everyone. And so storytelling and culture making have a lot of work to do towards convincing people that these things are possible and worth fighting for. And then that will translate into sort of political will And then political will translate into political action, and political action may ultimately achieve some results. So I think it starts with imagination. If you don't imagine that a better future is possible, you won't even try for it.
Mm-hmm.
So first it must be imagined, then it must be argued, then it must be believed, then it must be demanded, then it must be worked for, then it must be achieved.
Yeah, it's like planning a trip to New York City. Like, you start looking at all the different sites and things you can go to, pizzerias, visit the Statue of Liberty, go do, like, you think about the trip that you want to have, but nobody ever actually thinks about the flight. Nobody envisions the flight or anything like that, but it's the flight that gets you to New York City so you can do all these things. And that's what you're talking about, is just starting with that bit of imagination, that spark. You're like, wouldn't it be fun to go visit New York City?
Well, and not only that, but somebody had to imagine New York City.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody had to imagine that a city could be here. Somebody had to imagine a plan for that city. Somebody had to imagine the buildings that were built there. Someone had to imagine the way life would unfold there. And people believed that a city could be there. People believed that buildings could be built, that streets could be laid out. And so those things were done. And now people can live in that city. The future is an unbuilt city. The future is an unbuilt city that can be planned, that can be imagined and planned and built and inhabited. And we can decide collectively to imagine a wasteland where few people prosper and the rest of us are stuck in cycles of insecurity.
Mad Max.
And or we can imagine a future where the majority of people prosper and share in that prosperity and have access to prosperity and livelihood and education and all those things. And we can build that future. But before it can be planned, it has to be imagined. And then it has to be argued for. And then that argument has to win. And so it's a process.
Mm-hmm.
It's a process.
In terms of that process, though, your latest book, as I said, is Shared Universe. And I'm curious why a shared universe rather than a parallel universe, right? Because your introduction alluded to that there might be a parallel universe. So why a shared universe rather than a parallel universe?
Well, I think the book sort of alludes to both concepts of a shared universe and parallel universes, which has more to do with sort of how the book is assembled and curated. This book is a selection of my poems from the last 25 years, and from various other books and publications that I've done over that time. So sort of bringing poems together from like sort of all my previously published books and putting them in sort of one context is kind of like the shared universe device that we see in sort of modern day movie making, where you have a Captain America film, you have an Iron Man film, you have a Thor film, and then suddenly we understand that all these films are taking place in a shared universe, and you can have an Avengers film.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I thought it was sort of a whimsical idea to understand a selected poetry book as that kind of Avengers Assemble moment where poems from all these other books are brought together into one book to sort of go on an adventure together. And so in that way, the title of the book is quite whimsical, in that it's sort of referring to this sort of pop culture phenomenon of sort of crossover storytelling in cinema and novels and comic books and things like that. And the idea of sort of parallel universes comes into the way that I curated the book, which is instead of sort of organizing the book chronologically, here's poems from my first book, here's poems from my second book, and so on, I organized them sort of thematically and aesthetically in terms of how these books might have manifested themselves in parallel universes. Instead of the books that I published over the last sort of 25 years in the way that we did, I like to imagine that I might have published them in slightly different formats or in different organizations, different combinations, and it's those imaginary books that I'm selecting from and organizing the selected volume according to. And now that I've pulled them from their various sort of parallel universes, and now they share a universe in this volume. And I think we're just sort of getting to that, actually, in sort of like the Marvel films, which seem to be ramping up towards a more sort of multiverse kind of
Doctor
format.
Strange, yeah.
So, and I'm not above saying that that I might be inspired to sort of organize my poetry, somewhat inspired by comic books and superhero films and things like that. I don't really believe in high and low culture. There's just culture, and whatever is effective is effective. And whatever sparks people's imaginations is what sparks people's imaginations. I understand that I work in an art form that has less broad popular appeal than, say, a superhero film, but I can certainly borrow from that genre what I think is interesting and use it as a framework for the work that I'm doing. And that's what I've done with this book.
Was there any surprises as you kind of look back and you were kind of curating this poetry and putting it together? Did certain poems take on more meaning with the passage of time?
I don't know that they took on more meaning with the passage of time, but they might have taken on more meaning with the way that I grouped them. Because I wasn't grouping them chronologically, I could take a 20-year-old poem and put it next to a 15-year-old poem, a 10-year-old poem, and a poem I just wrote, and kind of, just by placing them next to each other, make them sort of interact and sort of call to one another or reference one another in different ways. And I think that may have enhanced the meaning of some of the poems just by juxtaposing them differently than a chronological arrangement would have allowed. By placing them together more thematically and aesthetically, I think the poems sort of worked together better. And then because of the new context they're given, they might seemingly have more to say, or say it a bit more emphatically.
Yeah, so then would you consider this to be a commentary on time also? Like you said, like you're a science fiction guy and you're juxtaposing all these different old poems, new poems. Is it a commentary on time as well? Because you got to have a strange relationship to time, knowing that you're a science fiction guy.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I've thought of it in that way, Sammy. Certainly, the sort of the imagining how these books might have unfolded in other universes. There's an element of time there that maybe time has unfolded differently in these other universes. But I don't think I've had like a dedicated sort of, Back to the Future slingshot around the sun kind of idea of sort of playing with time in this book. Although certainly, taking poems out of chronological order and rearranging them, I'm certainly doing something with time. And I guess, in a way, imagining me at different points in my life when I would have written these poems, and making and putting the various versions of myself side by side with one another through these poems is sort of an interesting exercise. But I'm not sure that I was. I'm not sure if that was my main conscious objective in the rearrangement of these poems. It was certainly more thematic and aesthetic, and if there was some kind of chronological game happening at the same time, that was a byproduct of the thematic and aesthetic arrangement.
What about you as a creator? Like, you create more than poetry. You do paintings, images, all kinds of different things. You make music. So you're a multimedia artist. Like, do you have like an adverse relationship with time, or do you? Because some people always feel like they're running out of time, or they don't have enough time to do this, to do that. They have kind of a lot of creators have a very negative relationship with time. They always feel like it's a deadline or pressures on them or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know that I do. I have I have a lot of anxieties and worries and sort of preoccupations in my life. But aging, so far, knock on wood, hasn't been one of them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel sort of under the gun to produce, and I'm paintings, poems, music, whatever. I just sort of do things as sort of the moment sort of dictates. And I'm not sure I'd be able to really work any other way. So I feel kind of thankful for that, because I do know people who sort of feel compelled in a race against time to get their work finished.
That's what I mean.
And
Yeah.
I'm not sure I feel that pressure. I finished the last thing I needed to finish for Shared Universe at sort of the end of February, beginning of March this year, 2020. And I haven't written any poetry since then. And for me, this sort of time away from writing poetry is actually fruitful. It's like in agriculture, sometimes you have to let the field lie fallow for a year
Mm-hmm.
so that the soil can regenerate and become fertile again. And if you don't lie fallow, the soil, you can wear out the soil, and the soil won't be as fertile. So I've taken most of a year away from writing at all, and I feel no pressure because of that. I actually feel like, this is a good time for me to just sort of sit and reflect, and maybe put a little bit of distance between me and this book, because I feel like this book sort of puts a cap on 25 years of writing for me. So whatever I do next can be a fresh start. I've got sort of nothing left laying around. Like, anything that I sort of wanted out there is now out there. And so I don't actually have a like a folder on my computer that's like, poems I haven't dealt with or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So when I do get back to writing, it'll be completely fresh, and I can sort of start over, and I don't know what that's going to be. And I think if I didn't take some time away from writing, I would just sort of instinctively just sort of keep writing in the same way, keep writing the same thing. And so I put this book out, 25 Years of Writing, Shared Universe, New and Selected Poems, 1995 to 2020. And now I've been taking a break from writing.
Yeah.
And I don't feel that pressure to produce all the time. And I've only made like 4 paintings this year. And I haven't written any music since before the summer. So I feel like I'm really just sort of taking some time to just reflect on my sort of creative patterns, and, the things that inspire me and what I've done. And I feel like whenever I get back to it, it'll be fresh. And I don't like to put that kind of pressure on myself.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me a lot of like very popular comedians like Chris Rock, Louis C.K., Jerry Seinfeld, a number of those bigger ones like that, where like they'll tour, do a whole bunch of shows, basically develop an hour of stand up, then do an HBO special or Netflix special, and kind of retire all that material, and then they have to start all over again. So it's like, rather than keep doing the same jokes or the same kind of themes or whatever, they kind of just put everything aside, take a break, and then go back out and start trying to figure out what's funny about where they're at, and kind of start developing a new hour.
Yeah, I kind of feel like George Carlin might have been like one of the pioneers of sort of that
Mm-hmm.
methodology.
Yeah.
And now it seems to be the way that a lot of the sort of the very best comics work, and that sort of comedians that sort of have the same act year after year after year after year are now seen more as like hacks.
Mm-hmm.
And and it used to be before the internet and before more frequent media appearances, someone could develop a set and sort of tour around the US or the world for years on the same material. And in each place that you visited, it would be new because nobody there had seen it before.
New to
But
them.
now, new to them. It's because now as soon as you're on the internet, everyone can see it at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll need something new the next time people see you. And so I think some of what you're talking about is sort of driven by the need to be creative, and I think some of what you're talking about is like a necessity of media and media
Correct.
saturation.
Mm-hmm. And it's opportunity to like it's a challenge too, right? Like if you've successfully created 1 hour stand up, that's a great achievement. Now you want to see if you can do it again. And it's the same thing for you. Like 25 years of writing poetry is a great achievement. And it makes sense to put a best of collection, like a shared universe, celebrating your work. But now it's like, can you do it again? Right? That's what you want to see. Like you've done one mountain once. Can you do another mountain again?
Yeah, and I have no idea what I'll do next.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still just sort of reflecting, and I'll, when I, as the expression goes, when the spirit moves me,
Mm-hmm.
I'll, I'll start whatever it is that I'm going to do next with writing. And I've had some thoughts about sort of various things I can start doing, but I don't think I've actually convinced myself that uh, to get started. And I don't know what the inciting moment will be when I get back to writing again. Maybe it'll be like just the end of February,
Mm-hmm.
beginning of March, and once maybe just once a calendar year has gone by, that'll seem like enough. I can't say. We'll find out in 2 months.
I like that. And so, with the uncertainty of our lives right now during the pandemic, I want to switch this to readers now. You're the poet who does the writing, but for people who read poetry and going through this pandemic, are dark times like this the bat signal to read more poetry?
I mean, I think there's two reasons people turn to poetry for the most part, aside from just from people who just enjoy poetry and it's part of their regular reading habit. People seem to turn to poetry in times of celebration,
Mm-hmm.
weddings, births, things like that. And people seem to turn to poetry in times of despair, funerals, times of great personal strife, and these seem to be the times that people turn to poetry. So if there's great societal strife, great societal turmoil, it seems natural to me that more people will turn to poetry in whatever form it is that they find it or enjoy it, or find meaning or solace in it, or even a reflection of whatever darkness they're feeling. And if there's a light at the end of the tunnel and a change in the political winds brings about a more optimistic view of the world, then I think people will also uh, turn to poetry to sort of resonate with that feeling a bit more powerfully. I think literature and poetry and storytelling and the experience of art in many ways exists to inspire us, but also as a kind of resonance chamber for us to sort of be more attuned and more alive to our own sort of sensations of the world. And we turn to poetry to give voice to the things that we're feeling and don't have words for. And certainly the world provides ample opportunity for us to feel things that we have trouble putting into words. And I think that's why poetry exists for many people.
Yeah, like weddings is a good example of what you just said, where like you feel all these emotions and you are looking forward to this great event and to your life with your wife and all these kind of things. And it can be hard to put all of that into some sort of like context. Like, I love you or thank you for being my life or whatever. These kind of sentiments that we usually express, they feel a little short. They come up a little empty when you want to express something big and dramatic.
Well, even at the most sort of superficial end of this equation is the greeting card.
Mm-hmm.
When there's something you want to express to somebody, whether it's I love you or happy birthday or I'm sorry about your loss or get well soon, and you don't necessarily feel like you have the words for it, you can go to the drugstore and you can buy a card that will express it for you, and it's often written in a little verse that that makes the expression of that idea, that thought, or that wish a little bit more memorable, a little bit more beautiful, and you can give that to somebody. And I think that the impetus of buying a greeting card is sort of just the tip of the iceberg of what engagement with poetry and literature and the arts can do for us in terms of giving voice to those things that we're having trouble making sense of in the world or in ourselves. And when we read poetry and novels and plays and experience plays on the stage and watch films and listen to song, all of these things are expressions that we can then hold up to our own experience of the world and uh, and, and and our experience of our own inner lives, and see where the pieces match up and go, that's how I feel, or that's an interesting idea I'd like to explore a little bit more. So, I mean, the arts are a way for us to connect with ourselves, connect with the world, connect with other people, and sort of broaden our minds. And and they function in a lot of different ways, but I think it all comes down to that sort of someone buying a greeting card because they're looking for the right way to express something that's important to them.
Mm-hmm.
And it can start in a moment like that. But if you take that moment of looking for the right way to express something important, that's the arts in general. And
Yeah.
so I think poetry sort of fulfills that niche in a way that's in a very specific thing that poetry does,
Mm-hmm.
and dance does it in another way. And which is why we have so many different art forms, because there are so many different ways to express these things that are important or that are resonant or that are enlightening or enlivening and enriching in some way, that help us communicate with others, that help us understand ourselves, that help us make sense of the world. And so I think there's always going to be a reason people will turn to poetry, whether it's joy, tragedy, confusion, something in the middle.
That's an inspiring takeaway. We can end it there. Where can people find you online to hear about your inner expressions, whether that be about future, hope, optimism, sci fi, movies, poetry? Where can people find you online?
If people go to paulvermeersch.ca, they can find out more about my books, my artwork, my music, and they can find links to my social media platforms there as well. That's paulvermeersch.ca.
And the new book is Shared Universe New and Selected Poems, 1995 to 2020. Congratulations, it's appearing on a few best books of 2020 lists. That's got to be really exciting. High five for that.
Thanks, Sammy. Yeah, it's been despite all the difficulties and not being able to tour the book live and in person and engaging with audiences the way that I would like to, it's been a really interesting year, and it's been a fun year trying to promote this book, and I'm glad that it's getting into the hands of readers and people really seem to be enjoying it. So that is fun, and that's a rewarding experience, despite all the all the troubles that we've experienced this year as well.
Okay, great. We started off with Tenant. We covered parallel universes. We covered a shared universe. We covered Marvel movies. We covered prophecy, clairvoyance, and the futurism of Walt Disney. I think we did quite a bit of work today. I think we did a good job.
It's been fun, Sammy. I want to thank you for having me on my Summer Lair again. It's been a real treat.
Yo, that was poet and writer Paul Vermeersch talking about his poetry collection, Shared Universe, New and Selected Poems, 1995 to 2020. This is my Summer Lair, and I am Sammy Younan. I gotta make some tea and sort out Paul's thinking on creating a positive public imagination. Personally, I'm Team Dystopia. I adore ruckus and delight in darkness in my science fiction movies and novels and comic books. But, this is a big old but I do wonder if he's right. That is, if we showed the public more light, would that make a difference? How do we dream out loud? And I'm certainly not talking about social media. When Paul was talking about positive public imagination, I kept thinking about Mercy Street by Peter Gabriel. A haunting, unsettled song, much like his other hit, Here Comes the Flood. Mercy Street is one of his best. The song opens with these lyrics. Looking down on empty streets, all she can see are the dreams all made solid, are the dreams made real. All of the buildings, all of the cars were once just a dream in somebody's head. Mercy Street. If you don't know the song, ask YouTube. Though before you do that, can I ask you a question? Who today is writing or making movies that you think echoes what Paul is saying? Who are some creators that look towards the future and imagine a better, brighter world? Who are the new Walt Disneys or bold Gene Roddenberrys? Let me know. I'm at My Pal Sammy for all three. My Pal Sammy for Twitter, IG, and Facebook. If you want to share your public imagination with me, I'm at My Pal Sammy. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me in a Netflix world. Poetry, yo.